Hello and welcome to Politics Today, and in this programme we shall be expressing how US President Donald Trump is extremely concerned about freedom of speech and religious expression, that he sent a delegation from the US State Department to investigate. So we'll be asking, should Donald Trump intervene in British domestic policies, or is it important that he stands up for Christians facing persecution in this country? And in this programme today, I'm joined by Robert Harris from Voice for Justice UK, together with Dr. Sarah Tung from Prayer for Parliament. So warm welcome to the programme. Sarah, I'll start off with you. You do great work, not only on Revelation TV, but also with Prayer for Parliament as well, praying where it really matters in the corridors of power. Just share with us recent activities on behalf of Prayer for Parliament UK and how important it is that our viewers and Christians pray for those in authority, particularly our members of Parliament and ministers of state.
Well, first and foremost, our main prayer is, consistent prayer, is to expose the truth, to bring things to light, and God is certainly doing that. We're growing and changing. I think we always need to seek to do as the Lord would lead, and the Lord seems to be asking us to adapt and change and grow in number. So we're looking forward to what the Lord will bring through new people.
Excellent. And great to see you back on the Politics Today, Robert.
Nice to be back.
Thank you so much for the work that you do and the team do at Voice for Justice UK, where it matters in Parliament, in the corridors of power. Just share an update on the work of Voice for Justice UK as you defend our Christian freedoms in Parliament.
Well, I'd like to highlight two big themes that we're working on all the time. One is the Commission of Inquiry into Discrimination Against Christians, which we commissioned. So we're hearing evidence from Christians who say that they have faced discrimination on account of their faith, injustice or hostility or stigma. It could be in the workplace, it could be online, it could be in any area of life. And we're gathering all of that evidence together with a view to, God willing, producing a final report at the end of the 2-year inquiry, which will end around September, October this year, and with a view to producing the report early next year. The other key thing that we're doing is we're galvanising all our many supporters to contact their MP to vote the right way with regards to the assisted dying bill. This, I prefer to call it the assisted suicide bill, because it will literally be a culling of the old, the frail, the disabled, those who are vulnerable for a whole range of health reasons. It opens a box that is, in my view, it's the most dangerous legislation I can imagine that could ever be before Parliament. I mean, you had the Abortion Act, that was and continues to be a disaster, but this is absolutely awful, that it places the most vulnerable in society at risk of death.
And so what do you make of this extraordinary story that the Daily Telegraph published that has become the whole basis of this programme? And for our viewers, I'll read out the headline. Trump sends free speech team to interview UK activists. And the subtitle is, State Department diplomats huddle with pro-life campaigners in the latest sign of US willingness to intervene in domestic British affairs. Share with your thoughts on what I think is an extraordinary article, but also shows that what is really happening behind the scenes in terms of British-American relations under Trump.
The laws originated from biblical truth, and America is still trying to implement those laws, and Starmer is trying to move the goalposts. And so Trump is standing in the gap, or his administration is standing in the gap for what the basic common law and the basic rudiments of the Judeo-Christian society that this and the West have basically, and Trump is coming against that. Sir Keir Starmer is coming against that in his role, and we didn't vote for this.
No, absolutely. And Robert, as someone who is an expert in the whole field of religious freedom and freedom of speech, do you believe that President Trump and his administration, who have serious concerns, are right to be concerned about the state of freedom of speech and also freedom of religious expression in this country that has such a deep historical sense of freedom dating all the way back to the Magna Carta?
Yes. Well, I think social and political etiquette would dictate that one country in the Western world should not be criticising another country's political affairs. We certainly feel it's acceptable for a Western country to criticise a non-Western country for, say, human rights violations. But, you know, etiquette would suggest we don't do it to our own people, as it were. However, that is not really observed by both sides. Take Roe v. Wade, which was overturned in 2022 in the Dobbs decision. Boris Johnson at the time, Keir Starmer at the time, who was the opposition leader, both publicly condemned in the most strongest of language that decision. Now, that could be deemed to be interference because it was the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, according to the Constitution, as they understood it, overturned a big landmark decision. So was it acceptable for the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, now the Prime Minister, to condemn that? So I think it's very pragmatic, this really. People will say, America shouldn't be criticising what we do here, but we do it in the other direction. So it's in an ideal world, we should all be nice to each other, but that's not really how it works.
Very true. And Sarah, so this Telegraph article dates back to March. It was only published recently, but dates back to March. So according to the Daily Telegraph article, President Trump sent out a 5-member delegation from the US State Department to this country to interview Christians who have been arrested for silently protesting outside abortion clinics across the UK. What does this tell us about how the Trump administration reviews religious freedom and freedom of speech? And certainly this will clearly unsettle our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Well, in the article, it references that the reason that the Trump administration is doing this is because the law is impinging because of the internet and websites and chats like TikTok and WhatsApp and Facebook and all those. The intercommunication comes across the pond. And so they're saying, well, this does affect us. But also, they're saying we're not really interfering, we're protecting our own. But they're also protecting the British citizens by saying, by coming alongside them and encouraging them to stand on their rights. So it would seem interference, it would seem muddling, but they find through the back door a way of basically safeguarding the Christian freedoms that both countries have shared for centuries.
Absolutely. Robert, the big question of the programme and the big question, this whole issue to do with the fact that President Trump has sent a delegation from the State Department to investigate freedom of speech and religious freedom of expression. Is it ethically and morally right for President Trump's administration to do this?
There are many ways of answering that question. The first thing I would say is it shines, for us pro-lifers, it shines a very important spotlight on an issue that no one wants to talk about, but now everybody's talking about it, and that is the unborn child. Is the unborn child a person who deserves to be protected like you and I? And we would say yes, absolutely. There is another side to this, because take, for instance, the Charity Commission. There's charities like Marie Stopes International. I think they call them MSI International now. They've dropped the Marie Stopes name because of her sympathies with Adolf Hitler. That's another story. So that's an abortion provider that provides abortion, quote unquote, services in this country. It also provides abortion in other countries. So let's look at Africa, for example. In many countries on the African continent, abortion is prohibited by law. MSI operates in those countries under the radar, providing abortions to African women. Now, let's just think about that for the moment in the context of what you've just raised. The British government, through the Charity Commission, giving legal status to this organisation operating abroad, doing illegal activities, and still getting the tax-exempt status afforded by the British government, is that acceptable? Now, on a legal level, it's not acceptable. Now, they would say, well, a woman deserves the right to choose and all this nonsense. It's ideological nonsense as far as I'm concerned. But let's look at that in perspective. There's other organisations, Amnesty International, are doing various things in countries, promoting various ideas and ideologies that are an affront to those countries, both culturally and legally. But the British government has zipped its mouth up. They don't say a word. So if we're going to say, is it right for the American government in this context to be saying what it's, to be advocating for pro-lifers and quote unquote interfering with British affairs, we are doing the same thing in other countries as well. So that's that. I would just say there's some hypocrisy here. Let's just be honest. It's going on in both directions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for clarifying. And Sarah, the State Department investigators are led by Samuel Sampson, and he's a special advisor to the State Department and Donald Trump. According to Telegraph, they've had meetings with officials from the Foreign Office, but they've also challenged officials from OFCOM, and the reason is because of the Online Safety Act that hasn't been implemented. But for the Trump administration, this is a huge source of contention. Just kind of share with us how, for example, this is also linked in Starmer's Britain to this Online Safety Act, and this could potentially damage the special relationship between the US and Britain over the whole issue of religious freedom, freedom of expression, but also freedom of speech.
Well, I kind of referenced that earlier, but what I want to pick up from what you've asked and what Robert has said, it is hypocritical. All of this is hypocritical, pointing the finger at who says what to whom. This is the backstory or the kickback from globalism. So there are a small number of countries and groups that want control, and they think that they know what's best. And now somebody else from another country that's not globalist is saying, well, we think that this is best. So they're getting hit with their just desserts, I would say, that no matter what different groups believe, if you want to have sovereignty in a nation, you have to allow, as Robert was saying, you have to respect their laws. The IMF for a long time has tried to manipulate and control those poor nations with what I would say are more Christian, more ethical, more pro-life ethos and laws. And so you've got that on the one side, and on the other side, you've got people now saying, well, okay, if you can tattle on this group and try to manipulate them, then we'll do the same. But at least, as I've said, this online safety bill will affect Americans, and because they will be, I mean, in principle, they'll be arrested for things that they've said online, living in the United States, because it can be viewed in Britain or anywhere else that wants to have a look. So it's insane. The online safety bill is crazy. The tit for tat is crazy. Countries should ideally, I think, look after themselves. But when they are not looking after themselves, it is good that somebody steps in. The problem is we have a differing of opinion. I think, by and large, we would agree, and the viewers would agree, in Christian freedom of speech. But others disagree. So then we've got this conundrum.
Robert, the US administration are very concerned and very alarmed about how pro-lifers are effectively being persecuted under Starmer's Britain, and these are the ones that the investigators have met, spent time with, and then will present their findings to the president. Share with us how this actually is giving hope to pro-lifers in this country, knowing that they have the backing and the support of the US president and his administration. And what does this say about the value system that President Trump and his administration are running from?
Well, it's greatly encouraging that they are raising the profile of this issue, this pro-life matter, because at the end of the day, I see the pro-life matter, it's not an ideological thing, it's about women and it's about children. It's about protecting women so that they know what they're doing when they have a pregnancy, and you know, ideally they should be given counselling if they're thinking of an abortion, but that does not happen in this country, which is an awful shame. There's a huge loophole in the system that allows a woman to be persuaded that an abortion is the right thing, but actually she's not given counselling to actually process that decision and to consider all the short-term and the long-term, lifelong implications on her mind and her life. So I think it's raising the profile, and it's also bringing an issue into the open that the ideologues would prefer to keep quiet about. So I think that's very, very good. But can I just give you some examples? Because on the Commission of Inquiry, we've interviewed several people, Isabel Vaughan-Spruce, whom I think you're going to bring up in a few moments.
Yes, absolutely.
She gave 2.5 hours of testimony, and there have been others, Father Sean Goff, another person who got into trouble for praying outside an abortion clinic. These are people, in fact, I won't refer to those two at the moment, but just generally, the people outside the abortion clinic are there to offer help quite often. And it's non-intrusive. If a woman wants to go in and doesn't want any help, doesn't want a conversation, they just let them pass freely. They are extremely impeccably behaved. And I'm not just saying that because I believe in pro-life. They really are on top of this because they want to be above reproach. They don't want to do anything that is on the wrong side of the law or morals. And you know, they offer help. What does help look like? I'll just say briefly. They offer help if a woman cannot afford to have the child, if money is the sole problem. They will provide through the outlets that they direct the lady to, they will provide money for the rest of that child's life to support that child. And this is not just, you know, hearsay. They actually do it. I've interviewed some of the women who have gone through this, and they do deliver. And they offer befriending, they offer emotional support, and the women never look back and regret what they received as that help. And they have a child in their life now they can look to, they see that smile from their son or their daughter, and they don't regret their decision at all. So this idea of a woman's right to choose, what is a woman actually choosing? What are the long-term implications of that choice? Yes, it is a choice in one sense, but is it a free choice? I want people who are listening into this asking, is it a real free choice? Do they know what they're actually signing up to? Because I think many women deeply regret a decision about an abortion. And some might say it's easy for a man to talk. Maybe it's easy for a man to talk, but actually a child is conceived by both a man and a woman, so a man should not be excluded from this, I would say.
Absolutely, but there's also the other aspect of this one, the right to be able to have a peaceful protest, and this is this is what the Trump administration is concerned about, and I think Vice President Vance is particularly concerned about is the fact that there are buffer zones put in place with absolutely extreme measures for anyone who breaches these legislation, particularly up in Scotland as well. And as a kind of a recent Catholic convert only a few years ago, this is something that he is kind of fighting tooth and nail.
May I just clarify, some of these individuals who go there just to pray, not to interact with anybody, not to show any placards, they would say they are not protesting. They are there praying silently, not interacting with any passerby, people going to the clinic, they don't talk to them, they're just there to pray. And they believe that space, they need to enter into that space with prayer. That space should not be excluded by law for God to enter into through prayer. So they believe they have a moral, ethical right to be there. So they wouldn't say it's protest. Certainly if someone's holding up a placard, you could define that as a protest. But so there's many facets to this. People are there for many, many different reasons.
I appreciate you clarifying that one. And Sarah, what is your opinion, particularly on the keen interest that the Trump administration is taking in various cases? We mentioned Miss Vaughan-Spruce, and according to the Telegraph, she was arrested for praying silently outside an abortion clinic in March 2023. According to the Telegraph, she was not carrying a placard and didn't say anything about abortion procedures allowed. She was later then released without charge, but this whole situation has been condemned by the US Commission on International Religious Freedom for targeting religious expression. So clearly these are like red flags to the US administration right now. I mean, it would have been so different under Biden and Harris, but we've got the Republicans in now and they're taking this whole issue very, very seriously. And it's these big high profile media cases that the US administration are extremely concerned about. Why do you think it's so important for the US that there is freedom of speech and freedom of expression in Starmer's Britain today?
I think there's a moral principle, and I do think the Trump administration is full of people who, you could say, take the moral high ground in the sense that they are Bible-believing Christians. They pray before meetings. They are committed. Marco Rubio stood when his acceptance speech. He thanked Jesus, and so it's important to them in principle. I think they really care passionately, and the aspect that they can say, well, it's Americans getting influenced negatively by this online safety bill, and they can use that, but I think morally they really care. And I think the crux of the problem is that Sir Keir and I think it was actually the Conservative government who made this law about the boundaries and the buffer zones. The point is, it's a bad law. So the law, she did break the law because she was in the buffer zone. The fact that it's a bad law, categorically, it's saying you're not allowed to stand in certain places. Well, if that's the case, then why don't they cause pro-Palestinian protests to have buffer zones? They can't go within X number of feet of a synagogue. They won't do that. So that calls out the hypocrisy. It calls out the bias against Christianity. It calls out the legal system that is spiraling out of control by passing laws and implementing laws that waste time. She's released because it's a bad law. They're not going to admit it's a bad law, but she hasn't done anything wrong. And so the situation, not only are they looking at it from a moral view, but I think practically speaking, they're looking at Britain and saying, you're our parent nation and you're falling apart. If you're not going to help yourself, we'll help you.
Absolutely. And what's so interesting as well, Robert, is the fact that President Trump has actually called out our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, in the Oval Office over freedom of speech and religious freedom of expression. And this is what the Daily Telegraph reported of what Starmer said. They said, we've all had free speech for a very, very long time in the UK, and it will last for a very, very long time. Certainly, we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there. Share with us your thoughts on the Prime Minister's response, because it seems like he's speaking with a double tongue. On the one hand, he's wanting to appease the US president, but then we look at the fruits of what he's doing. And under Keir Starmer's Britain, there seems to be a two-tier justice system and a two-tier policing system. And also there's a two-tier freedom of speech in this country.
I think his words in the Oval Office were very woolly and they didn't really mean anything. My understanding of his ideology, Starmer's ideology, in line with many progressives, is that he is a believer in big government, which is totally the opposite of what the Trump administration stands for. So what is big government? Well, we've had it for so long now, I think some younger people might not know what it really stands for because they can't contrast it with what small government is. Big government is where you have a huge state overreach into people's lives through multiple quangos, through multiple pieces of legislation, many new offences coming out on the statute book faster than the police can actually get on top of it because the police don't have the resources to. So it's huge state overreach in every aspect of people's lives, all in the name of safety, preventing harm, providing welfare, all these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful utopian words. Whereas small government, there is a fiscal element to small government. It can mean small taxes, but on a social, cultural level, it's when the government gets involved in as little way as possible. Only when absolutely necessary do they intrude into private lives. So I'm a believer in small government myself. But you can see how the Trump administration is very provoked by this because they've got their constitution. We don't have a constitution. We have an unwritten constitution, which is an odd concept, but that's another subject entirely. They've got the first article in their constitution, which is freedom of speech. So it's absolutely significant, right at the heart of the law in America, that you can say what you like, almost what you like. I think apart from incitement to murder, incitement to violence, and perhaps one or two other things like shouting fire in a theatre when there's no fire, I think almost everything else with a few other exceptions, should be allowed. And I'm not an absolutist with free speech because I think there needs to be those few limits. But I think it brings up this contrast between big government and small government. And his is a belief in big government. We have a country that's ruled by quangos, and it's not just Keir Starmer. The Conservatives were, in my view, equally guilty.
Yeah, but I mean, just going on from what you say, essentially about state overreach, it's like this communist idea or hard left or even far right ideology that the state is the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-encompassing model of government, that if the state says this, do this, or the state does that. And there's two examples in history we need to follow with state overreach. That was the Nazis. Everything was done for the state. And also Stalin's Soviet Union as well. Everything was about the state.
The state tells you what to think, how to think, and what to say.
Well, basically the state is God.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was summed up very well there, Sarah. And share with us, Sarah, as we come to the last minute and a half, how our viewers can pray regarding this issue, because what is at stake is freedom of speech, is freedom of expression, and these are institutions within our democracy that previous generations have sacrificed their own blood in order to preserve.
Well, first I'm going to say a radical thing, which is to say, exercise your freedom of speech. Talk about Jesus as much as you can, wherever you can. And if that creates a ruffle, then at least that's going to disturb the powers that be to recognize there is a loud voice that doesn't want to lose their freedom of speech. And the second thing is to pray. Keep exposing. We're not afraid of what's being exposed. It's good that these things are being exposed. That's what we pray for, because then we know what's going on and how to pray.
Sarah and Robert, thank you for doing such a great job on Politics Today. Thank you. And thank you for watching this program today. One of the gifts that we've been given in this nation is freedom of speech, is religious freedom of expression. They're part of our democratic institutions and they need to be defended at all costs. So I welcome President Trump's move to intervene in British politics. Thank you for watching Politics Today.